everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. This episode of the show is being sponsored by my friends over at a company called Real Mushrooms, realmushrooms.com. Sky Chilton and his father, Jeff Chilton. I interviewed Jeff a number of episodes ago. Really interesting guys. I really enjoyed that conversation with Jeff. And it's a company that sells and distributes medicinal mushrooms in powder or capsule form. I was really happy to have these guys come on. I think they were very much in alignment with the values of the podcast. As you all know, a big part of this podcast is about plant medicine, holistic medicine, and I think the benefits of medicinal mushrooms are truly fantastic, and I think there's really a growing body of work that's really showing and alluding to all of the amazing properties that mushrooms have. They sell a lot of different mushrooms, things you've probably heard of, like reishi, chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail, cordyceps. Those are all mushrooms I work with. They're part of what I consider for myself a really holistic supplement regime. And the thing I really love about their company, not only are they really good guys, I think they're really ethical guys, but the product is really amazing. It's all 100% mushrooms. They're organic, and that's really rare. For better or for worse, the supplement industry is highly unregulated, and so often when you get supplements, you don't necessarily know what you're getting. You may be getting some mushroom, you may be getting a bunch of fillers and other things. Oftentimes, even when you're buying what may be a mushroom, it may not have any of that mushroom in it at all, unfortunately. Even some of the big, I think even the biggest company that sells mushrooms, actually it's not the fruiting body, not the mushroom itself. It's the mycelial, which is grown on grain, and then those things are mixed up and then sold in a supplement form. So not only are you not getting the mushroom itself, you're getting the mycelium mixed with grain. So it's one of the amazing things at Real Mushrooms is it's exactly that. It's real mushrooms. So it's 100% mushrooms, organic. So you're getting a really good product. You're getting the actual fruiting body, the mushroom itself, 100% of that. And again, just really great guys. I'm really happy to have them on and supporting this podcast. So if you'd like a really good product, you'd like to start working with medicinal mushrooms, check out their site, realmushrooms.com. And also listeners of this show, if you go to their site, realmushrooms.com/universe, you get 25% off your first order, which is a really good deal. And I think once you start working and tasting their products, you'll really see and feel a big difference. So thank you to them. And I think that's it. And without further ado, here is the intro to the show. Hey, everybody. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Shonagh Home. Shonagh is a really fascinating woman. She reached out to me a while back. She recently published a book. She's written a few books. This is her newest one. It was very serendipitous because she's also friends with a very dear friend of Marav and myself, Kathy Coyle, who also did an interview with her. So I was really happy to have Shonagh on. We spoke about her background, really a lot of topics. She's a really fascinating woman. We spoke about her childhood, her initiation through working with mushrooms, some of her different teachers throughout the world, kind of her shamanic path, her influence in Ireland and Scotland and the Celtic traditions, speaking a lot about that, about logic, about wisdom, about law, different plant medicines. It was just really a fascinating conversation, so I think you all will really enjoy this conversation. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. It's a website. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. To all of the patrons, to all the people supporting that way, as always, thank you very much for your help. It really does help to allow me to continue making these episodes and bringing on these wonderful people like Shonagh. If you're not able to do that, as always, just doing some of the really small things to help drive the algorithm. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, those things are really big help. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. So I think that's it. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Shonagh.
From the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Great. Well, Shonagh, thank you very much for coming on. We were chatting a little bit before, and you reached out to me. You have a new book that's come out. Beautiful cover, also, just as I'm looking at it. But I had a chance to read through it, and as I was saying, I often don't take on people that I don't know, but I did a quick YouTube search of your name, and the very first video that popped up was an interview that you did with a friend of mine and Mirav's, Kathy Coyle, who's a very beautiful woman and human being. So that's pretty much all I needed, and I said yes. So so it's a pleasure to have you come on. Some of the audience may have heard of you. I would imagine a lot haven't. So maybe to start, you could introduce yourself, and it's obviously always a big question, but maybe just say a bit about yourself, your background, and what's led you to do the work you're doing.
Let's see. Oh gosh, where do I even start? I was born in Canada, so I was there through 7th grade. And I'll just quickly say, you and I were talking about trees earlier, and as a child, we had a beautiful birch in front of our house and also a huge alder. And that alder tree was very dear to me. And so as a child, there was a branch that came out like this. I had to climb on rocks to get on the branch, but I would spend sometimes hours sitting in that tree, and it would speak to me. So as a child, I was, and I still am, clairsentient, where I would feel deeply, and also claircognizant. I would receive information. I called it confirmations. It was the strongest word that I could think of. And I also had an Irish grandma, and she was a master storyteller. So she was my introduction to the world of the fairy, to the other world. And then I was an avid reader, and I would go to the public library in Toronto and take out these books by Andrew Lang, the Blue Fairy Book, the Red Fairy Book. He and his wife were a folklorist, and they compiled all these beautiful old tales, and I just fell in love with that. And that really expanded and fed and nourished my imagination. And Rudolf Steiner talks about this, and he said something to the effect of that when children are not raised on those kind of fairy tales, they often end up with more sort of sterile mind, that it really nourishes the inner life of the individual. And so I was very lucky to have had that. And I also, then we moved to the States, and that was very difficult for me. And that sort of was a painful realization that, you know what, you don't fit in, it's not going to happen, try as I might. But that was also very important because it frees you up to explore in a way that kind of the regular folks are not. So it gave me a lot of leeway to be more of an individual kind of on my path. And so then fast forward, okay, so I didn't sort of take the usual path. I chose dance and acting in my 20s, and then I met the man who became the father of my children and did interior design for a while. So that was my first foray into sort of higher learning, if you will. I went to Parsons School of Design. So I didn't go to regular university, but I'm also an autodidact, and I've been a researcher my whole life. I love to learn. And when that marriage fell apart at around 40, I call that the midlife facelift. And that was my awakening. And I found my way through another wonderful man to Dr. Joy, who was a Johns Hopkins trained MD, and he walked away from everything and he became a teacher. And he was very mystical, very, very connected, Jungian inspired. And he was my teacher. And I had him for just 3 years, but I got the transmission. And he really was my teacher for this lifetime. And he helped me so greatly. And he was a master of understanding of the shadow and also of dreams. And that was when you could call it sort of the shamanic sort of opened up in me. And I had some very powerful experiences in the desert there where we would work with brew. And then my 40s were deep study with really just a small handful of superb teachers like Brew. And I had a wonderful teacher in the Yucatan, Miguel Angel Vergara. Worked with him for a couple of years. And I was, and still am today, a voracious student of the mystery. And it wasn't until the age of 48 when I found my way to the mushroom. And I first tried ayahuasca. And that was it was amazing because it was a circle of women. It was all women's ceremony. And I had my behind kicked in a big way by her. And it was very powerful. I worked with that just maybe 2-3 times, but something said to me, this is not your medicine. And I had a dear friend who worked with mushroom. He lives up in the rainforest, the Washington rainforest, very beautiful area. And so when he invited me up there to experience the mushroom, and I'll just say that I'm not someone who sort of experiments with drugs, if you will. I don't take any pharmaceuticals. I don't do recreational anything like that. So this for me was something very special. I knew I could feel the spirit of that mushroom calling me. And I had no idea what to expect. And I was very graced in that. Where he lived, it was near a waterfall. And so we were following Terence McKenna. So 5 dry grams in the darkness of a mossy rainforest and around midnight. And it was absolutely extraordinary. And the earth ended up speaking to me at some point. And I experienced a healing that I didn't know what to expect, but I was not expecting that. And when I got out of that medicine, I said, this is a portal. My God, this is a portal. And I said that all those years ago, and almost 13 years later, I say the same thing. You ask me what that mushroom is. It is a portal. And so I got home, it was all I could think about. And I wanted to go back in. And so what ended up happening unplanned is that I had a year of 12 months every month where I would go into the realm. So the first 6 months took place outdoors in the rainforest there. And then it was wintertime. I would go inward inside. And I joke that there aren't too many middle-aged ladies in suburbs going out into the forest and eating 5 dry grams of mushrooms, but I did. And my goodness, it's like I couldn't not go in. And it was cumulative. And what was happening to me was spirits were entering and coming through. And it was mainly birds. And at the end of that 12 months, I experienced these celestial beings come in. And that was very profound. And they spoke through me for over 2 hours. I had no idea that was even possible. So I also experienced a dark night of the soul that year. So it was very initiatory. And I wrote a book about that. It's called Love and Spirit Medicine. Because also as a researcher in that first year, I was reading everything I could about the mushroom. And most of the books were written by men, and they're dynamite books by really amazing men. But at the same time, I was like, where are the women? were books by women. And I did find a book by Margaret Deweese called Black Smoke. And that was about her experience with an ayahuasca shaman, and she had breast cancer. And it was a really, really good book. But I was writing about my experiences. And at the same time, my marriage was falling apart. So it was this whole, it just profoundly initiatory year. So that book came out. And then I started speaking here and there, little conferences, and doing some podcast interviews. And it was like a whole new life was birthed for me, a life that I never anticipated. And then almost 9 years ago, I began doing retreats. And that was simply because one of my clients who lived in a different state asked if she could come out and maybe stay with me and work with me and have an experience. And so I said, all right, let me figure this out. And so she came out. It was amazing. And then I spoke with another client of mine who would come just for regular sessions, because I do counseling work as well. And I just mentioned as sort of this is what I did last weekend. And she was like, you do that? I want to have that experience. What do you charge? And I was like, I don't know. But she ended up coming. And then that was amazing. And then a dear friend of mine who knew what I was doing said, hey, I've got a couple of these friends in New Jersey. They're wondering if they can fly out and work with you. So it just took on a life of its own. And I have been doing those retreats ever since. And then I go into the mushroom usually a couple of times a year. But what happened after a couple of years, those first 2 years, giving you a very long-winded answer here, but just to give you a reference point, those first 2 years, the spirits of the mushroom would say over and over, get your mind right, dear. That was the theme for me. Get your mind right, because I have, through the better part of my life, dealt with chronic worry and at times crippling self-doubt. And it really wasn't until fairly recently, like maybe 2-3 years ago, that I realized, I think that's what they call anxiety. And I was like, I work with people with anxiety, but I don't label. For me, it was more like, I got to figure this out. And this is what the mushrooms were doing. They were helping me figure this out and look at my own stuff and work through a lot of things, right? Because we know we go into these states and we receive counsel, we receive tremendous insight. And so that was what was happening. Well, after almost 3 years, they started teaching me how to use this mind. And then they started speaking through me poetically. So I'm a medium, and when I go into those states, they speak through me in perfect rhyme. And I ended up traveling to Scotland with Freddie Silva, who is one of the world's leading authorities on pop circles and sacred sites. He has a number of published books, and he does these little tours with just 6 people. And this was to the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. And I'm Scottish, Irish, French, and that called to me immediately. Every hair on my body stood on end. And I didn't have much money. That was before the retreats started. But I sent my deposit in that day. And I went out there. And the first place we went was the Isle of Lewis. And that's where the stone circle Callanish is. But there were 2 smaller circles that he took us to first. And so standing in the center of one of those circles, I was just kind of feeling the energy. And I felt a tall male being to my left. And he extended his hand. And he had a golden orb in his hand. And I knew, these are my people. I know I have ancestors in this area. And so I reached out my hand and I took it and I placed it in my heart center. And as soon as I did, I felt like I had a device in there. And I'd brought a digital recorder, and just thinking, if I get insights, whatever, and I'm out and about, I can just speak into that. So we go to Callanish, and I stood by a stone, and poetry came flowing forth. And that happened throughout that trip. And at some point they said to me, think of this as a cauldron and work with the metaphor of the cauldron. And then when I got home, I had a feeling. I was like, I feel like they came with me. I could feel them all around me. And so as an experiment, I just put my fingers to my keyboard and outpoured this message, pure poetry, like taking dictation, not going, what rhymes with what would be good? No, no, no. It just flowed through. And that continued for about 3 months. And so no mushrooms necessary. So anyway, that's to give you a background. So where I am today, this book, Poetic Whispers from the Cauldron of the Otherworld, is a result of these poetic transmissions from all these years. And it also explores the beautiful fairy lore of the Celts, because my co-walkers, if you will, my guardians and guides, are the Sidhe. And I really made that connection profoundly in Scotland, in those stone circles. And flowing throughout the book are these poetic transmissions. And I also speak of the training of the seer poets, and we can talk about that, because this is very old, and this kind of magic is in all of us, but most don't access it. I mean, we're born in a very different world now, and it's pretty secular, it's pretty superficial. It's all about, get to work, everybody, be productive. And we are so much more, and there is so much more. I see we are a living mystery, and we're in a living mystery, but our minds have been hacked. And so this is something that they emphasize. It's all about, all of us, get your mind right. Get your mind right, because the Holy Grail is in here. So yeah, I'll stop there.
It's interesting. In the beginning, you mentioned you grew up near an alder and a birch tree, and alder is actually the last tree I began to work with, and birch is one of the future ones that's calling me quite strongly. I'm trying to get my partner Marav to diet it, because it feels more like a feminine tree to me, and I think she would have a beautiful connection to it. But with that, you also mentioned that when you were a child, you recognized that you were clairvoyant, clairsentient. Can you speak more about that? About what that means to you? I mean, I'm sure some people are familiar with that word, but I think it's also, for many people, it's a bit of a foreign concept, or they don't necessarily have a deeper understanding of what that means.
Yes. So I was not clairvoyant. I was clairsentient and claircognizant. So
Cognizant.
clairsentient, you feel, and you feel deeply that the information comes through that sort of sensing things. And the claircognizant, that's when you get knowings. And I was raised Irish Catholic, and there's no discussion of that kind of thing. So I didn't have anyone to even sort of recognize that and discuss that with. So I pretty much kept it to myself. But I do remember knowing we were going to be leaving Canada. And I remember to this day very clearly, in 7th grade, my father sitting on a chair by the kitchen table and telling myself and my younger sister that we were going to be moving. And I remember just thinking, how is it that I know this? I know this. And there was no indication of this whatsoever. And I also knew no one will believe me. So it's something that I kept to myself. Now, when we moved to the States, we moved to a newly built house. It was in Connecticut, but it was built by Indian burial grounds. And of course, supposedly they were off to the side, but the house was haunted. And so my mother had the gift from they call it she was very, very psychic. And so we never discussed it with each other. I was there for 8th, 9th, and 10th grade in that house, but I felt that being, and I would always get up very early in the morning because I was a strange child, and I'd get up at like 5, and I like to go for runs. And anyway, I would feel that being in the same way that you feel someone behind you and you look behind you and there they are, but nothing would be there. My mother actually saw that being. And so it wasn't till we moved to a different town 3 years later. I don't even remember how the conversation came up with my mother, but I do remember being 15 years old and walking through that entire new house where we moved, feeling the house. And I realized, okay, it's clean. There's nothing here. And so when I look back on those 3 years in the haunted house, that's like training. And again, we all have that sixth sense where we can sense, but it became quite highly developed just out of necessity and the strangeness that you would feel at times in that house. But my brothers and sisters didn't, and sister didn't feel that. They didn't notice it, but my mother and I did. So that becomes extremely helpful down down the road in one's life, especially when working with other people and learning, where to really tune in so that if I'm talking to a friend or I'm working with a client and they're telling me something that's going on, I'm picking up information. I call it, I'm listening kind of beneath and between their words. And sometimes I can describe someone's mother or whoever, the antagonist within their story or whatever, even better, or in a way that they're just like, oh my God, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly how they are. And I also have had, before I even found my way to the mushroom, I've had a few times where someone who crossed over came into me and I spoke to the person I was working with and said something verbatim that they would say. So to me, this is just like being good at tennis or golf or something. It's like we all have some athletic ability in us, but some of us just kind of have an aptitude for it, right? So it just made sense that I kind of ended up where I did in terms of that deep shamanic exploration. And I see how life is, every kind of time period of our life is like a necessary staging that then brings us to that time where all of a sudden, things open up, and often from crisis. And what happened at the age of 40 was my marriage to the father of my girls collapsed, and that was my crisis. That was my opening. Brew, my teacher, would say, crisis awakens. And another very wise friend of mine would say, do you see the Isis in crisis, Shonagh? And so it's, and of course, in the shamanic tradition, which is around the world, there's some kind of crisis that occurs, whether it's a sickness, some kind of dark night of the soul, a deep emotional pain, whatever it is. But it kind of slaps you out of the mindset that you've been in to that point and causes you to question in a way that maybe you haven't before, and opens you to more of reality that you prior to that point were not aware of. So yeah, the clairvoyance is the ability to see. And so in Ireland, there are many who have what they call the second sight. It's called Andashela. And so they can see spirits, they can see things that are happening before they happen, that kind of thing. And I don't have that. But one of my teachers said the clairsentience and the claircognizance, that is actually that's a level of clarity that, is very informing.
You mentioned Rudolf Steiner, who I think is a fascinating human being, and this idea that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you said something along the lines that fairy tales are there for developing the magic of the child's mind. And like even now, I'm coming from a city, and it's been a while since I've lived in a city, and there's a lot of beauty, a lot of life, a lot of energy and things to do. But I think it's why also I moved out of a city, is because and it's mainly for me. It's certainly not an inherent truth, but I often feel there's a lack of spirit, there's a lack of soul. And you were mentioning that you grew up in nature, and it's something I think that more and more a lot of children are removed from. Um, Steiner was also really an advocate of that, about natural medicine, that the power of nature, the power of spirit. Is that something you see as important? I mean, in your formative years, or just in general? I mean, both that connection to nature and that idea of the fairy tale, because I think the fairy tale is something we've also really become cut off from. We're we're very much more in our rational mind and trying to explain things logically from a place of knowing the answer. And there can be a benefit to that, but we also, as you say, we begin to lose the magic. And especially in a child's life, if there isn't that magic, it also, I think, in a way, creates a cap or a limit as to what the potential of that child is. How do they see the world? What do they believe is possible? Um, Not that it can't be undone, but that it's creating certain layers then that are very hard to re-break through.
So, yes. And so I was in Toronto, which is a city, but I was in a neighborhood. And this was also, I mean, I was born in 1963, so there were no cell phones. And we were, thankfully, my parents really limited us on TV. We weren't, there was no TV in our bedroom. Thank God I didn't grow up with that. They were book people. And so they really emphasized that. But I spent time in the back garden and I was looking for fairies as a child. I mean, I was on a mission. And I went to a convent school run by nuns. And so we had recess and it was on this gorgeous, gorgeous property. It was beautiful. And so, oh my God, I just spent so much time outside and just using my imagination as children are meant to, right? And making up stories. And I was just charmed, as children should be, right, with the natural world. And and then when we moved to Connecticut also, um, we were again in a suburb. So I wasn't raised in like a New York city. And it's harder in the cities, of course, because it's a lot of concrete and you gotta be careful because there's a lot of people. And so as children, it's not like they can sort of run free. Whereas in Toronto, we had a neighborhood and we had kids up and down that road, and we just played outside all day as long as we possibly could. And because I had that incredible stimulation from those fairy books, it just, I don't know, it really nurtured the imagination. And the imagination is, I remember speaking to, I didn't homeschool my girls. They're now 23 and 26. I kind of wish I had now. But in any case, what school does, parochial schooling, is it shuts down the imagination in children. And we hear, oh, it's just her imagination, or oh boy, it's her imagination. Like, it's just dismissed and diminished. And it's also sort of like, all right, let's get back to the real world. And funny how the real world is totally focused on productivity for someone else's company, by the way. So this is something that children dearly need. And right now, what I find particularly heartbreaking is these devices. Um, I, my eldest daughter, I fought her getting a cell phone. They were just sort of coming into vogue. But then, she had this friend and this friend and this friend. I think it was her father who actually got her one, and she was 13. And then my younger daughter got one shortly thereafter. But, we had limits on that. But even so, you see these young children with these phones and they're completely entranced. Now, I was on in my first year of mushroom journeys with my dear friend in the forest who inducted me into the experience. I had one evening where by then I was divorced. And so my girls were with their dad. There was no one in the house. And I did a wee bit of mushrooms. And I had an office and it had my altar. And I never, ever, ever put that phone in my ear. I just haven't. And thank God, because that thing is just pulsating radiation. So I always have it on speaker. And so, you know how it goes black after a minute or two? I had that propped up on something and we were talking and the beings were in me. They were actually reading his mind. And then they said to me, because it's a polished black screen, they said, that is a scrying machine. And I was like, oh my God. And so for those who don't know, scrying it's very old art where you look into a polished surface and you see images and messages come through. This is a black mirror. And so it is very captivating and addictive. And what it does is it provides for our children now the story and the imagery. And children used to be, you would tell them stories, you would read them stories from a book, and then in their mind, of course, they would form the imagery. That doesn't happen for these children anymore. If I had children now, I would keep that stuff away from them. And I'll just tell a quick story where I was working. This was a number of years ago, probably almost 9 years ago, and I was working part-time at a little local farm store. And this was in Redmond, Washington. And it was a wonderful place. Anyway, this mother walks in. She was from LA and she had moved there recently. And she just kind of sails through, and there was a little step into the sales office. It was maybe 3 inches high. And then at some point, this little, like 3-year-old does a full face plant onto the floor. She had missed the step. And from her hands flew, sliding across the floor, a cell phone. So that little tiny child was walking around behind mom, just entranced by that black mirrored screen. That so much so that her own natural instincts didn't kick in to say, hey, lift your foot, there's a step. I never, ever forgot that. So this is not helping our children. It is not nourishing their creativity in any way. And I would advise for people, as I would advise for my daughters when they have their children, they already know this, to keep that crap away from them for as long as you can. Get them outside, tell them stories, read them stories, develop in them a love for books. Because it's not the same as watching something on a screen. And it is intrinsic to us as earth people that we need to be close to nature. And of course, Steiner emphasized this greatly the first 7 years of a child's life. He said, first of all, the auric field is forming. Everything is forming in that time. And what we need to encourage as parents is a love and connection to nature, because then that will live in that child moving forward for the rest of their life.
You write a lot about, and you seem to have a very deep knowledge of Celtic mythology lore, Irish lore. Was that something that was inspired? I believe you said your grandmother was Irish. Is that something that you, from a young age, felt called to, or was that something in an older age that you just began to discover, like on your trip to Scotland, where you felt that deeper connection?
Yeah, it was later in life, actually. My grandmother opened me to the fairy, and I had that for the rest of my life. But it wasn't actually until, so I mentioned I was working with Miguel Angel in the Yucatan, and I had some very beautiful experiences there with the spirits. And at some point, Miguel Angel and I hosted together a little tour there. And so 10 people came, and we were going to take them to different sacred sites. But I knew also at the site of Palenque, which was going to be the last place we went to, that place was ruled over, it is said, maybe 1100 years ago by Lady Zakuk, who's known as the Red Queen. And she's the Red Queen because her tomb is in the main pyramid and it's all painted red. And she was known for going into high trance states and giving prophecy. Well, we know the Maya had a very deep connection with mushrooms. So I would venture to guess that that's what she was eating to take her into those states. And so by then I'd been working with the mushrooms for maybe 2 or 3 years. And I knew I could connect with spirits. And I thought, what would that be like if I could go to Palenque, and could I possibly connect with her? And so I had just a gram of mushrooms, and I found my way to a quiet area there in the early morning. And I took the mushrooms, and I had this very powerful experience. And she came through, and she was sort of all orangey red. She had this huge headdress of feathers, and she was eyeing me. Between each feather was a serpent, and they were eyeing me. And we proceeded to have a conversation. And that lasted for, I don't know, however long it did, 20 minutes or something. At some point, because my medicine that I work with, my spirit is the owl, and I have owl wings all over my house. She plucked a feather from her headdress and she reached out, extended her hand to me, and said, "You are a collector of these." And I reached out and I took the feather. And when I drew my hand back, I felt a moment of doubt. And I thought, okay, first of all, is there something connected to this feather? Of course there is. There always is. Nature is exchanges. And then I thought, what if this is maybe a trickster spirit? And I don't know. I wasn't sure. And so I actually handed back the feather. And I said, "I will be in my light and you in yours." And I found myself in this cylinder of crystal clarity. And in that clarity, I realized that was the Red Queen. And she handed you a feather. And by God, you gave it back. And as soon as I had that realization, her voice came in and said, "You have made your decision." And my eyes flew open, and I realized that I had, in my search for a quiet place, I positioned myself from the only, right across from the only face left on the side of the main pyramid. So I got up, I had brought offerings, and I started walking to the pyramid and bawling my eyes out, thinking I'd screwed up. Anyway, I gifted my offerings, and then I found Miguel in hell. Later, he was at a little cafe while everyone was walking around for the day, and I was very upset, and I told him what happened, and he, I'll never forget, put his hand on my hand. He said, "Shonagh, maybe you're not ready to carry the feather of a Mayan queen, and your inner wisdom knew that." And so the next morning I woke up crying, and then in her voice came in and said, "I knew you wouldn't take the feather. Now go home and write." And so there was a huge lesson for me there. And I will say, when I got home, of course, did more research, and I discovered in an encyclopedia that she is always shown with a headdress of quetzal feathers. So that was my final kind of wink, like, dear, yes, you were speaking to me. But I also knew when I left Palenque that my time there was complete and I would never be back. And a few months later, I did a mushroom journey, and the spirit said to me, "Daughter, it is time for you to explore your own magical bloodline. You are a Celt." And that's all they said. And so, of course, I love this is how the mushroom works in rhyme and riddle, and it just gives you little clues, and you come out of it, and then you have to do the digging. And so that opened me to the lore of the Celts, the lore, the mythology. And I started reading for the first time. I mean, I'd heard bits and pieces, but delving deeper into that. And for the first time in my life, because having always felt like I was on the outside looking in, felt like I'd found a kind of home base for myself. And I also remember thinking, oh my God, this is absolutely beautiful. Why are we not taught this in school? And then, of course, to learn of what was done to the Scots and the Irish, all this colonialization stuff. I mean, my God, those people were the uh, Irish were almost genocided with the famine, which was no famine. There was plenty of food, but it was leaving Ireland before their very eyes, and they were made to starve. And so, just going deeply into all of that, the history as well as the myth and the lore. It was profound. And I also realized how important it is for all of us to tap our roots. It's so, so important. The creator has made us different for a reason. We're not the same. And each culture has its beauty and its richness and its unique traditions. And so it just changed everything for me. And then when I was working with the mushroom, I was called to, I didn't plan it, but I had those 12 months in a row of those deep explorations. And then after 12 years, I apprenticed myself to those teachers, and I will be an apprentice for the rest of my days. But after 12 years of apprenticeship, this book came forth, this Poetic Whispers. And basically, it's sort of calling me out of my cocoon because I got very comfortable with these one-on-one retreats that I do. They take place in my home. They're so intimate. I love that. And I am witness to the humanity of another. But then this book has come forth and they have said, daughter, you have to take this out, further out. And, really, I don't call myself a shaman. I'm inspired by the Ban Draoi, which is a Celtic medicine woman, that's Kathy Coyle, and also by the fili, which is the seer poet. And I'm inspired by that. But in any case, it is the role of and the seer poets were the shamans, of the shaman, to be the intermediary, to go into the other world and have that experience and bring back whatever the gifts of the other world. It doesn't have to be to, a large audience. It doesn't have to be to anyone. It can just be for your own, your own growth. But that is what the shaman does, to inspire and to uplift their people. So yeah, I think I've answered your question. Hope. I tend to weave.
Could you, I mean, this is going to be a huge question, but do you think you could speak a bit more about that Celtic worldview? Because again, I think it's something that many people in the West have some understanding. I mean, everyone is familiar with the idea of fairies or fae. People know that a long time ago there was witches or medicine women, the Ban Draoi, but I think we become very disconnected to that. It's something that happened at some point in the past, and it's often viewed in that same way as a fairy tale, that it's something that's not real. It's just something that we tell ourselves, or it's for children, or it's an outdated knowledge, and we've moved past that. But like you said, I mean, for lack of a better word, shamanic traditions all over the world really are pointing towards the same truths. And so for many people, that information isn't dead. It's very much alive. It's very much part of reality. It's very much part of how they see the world and how they experience the world. And yet in the West, I think most people have become very disconnected to that for many different reasons. But that Celtic tradition is still alive. I mean, still, if you go to Ireland or Scotland, I mean, or even Iceland, people do still speak about the fairies in different ways. Some really are connected to them. Some it may be more folkloric or ritual, but they still have a trace of its reality. Like there's still certain precepts or things you do or you don't do, or offerings that you do. So while it may not be a huge part of the worldview, it's still very much ingrained in their daily lives. So again, I know this is a huge question, but just if you're able to shed any light on that worldview of what you've learned from it through direct experience, through your research, but like who are the Celts? How did they see the world? How did they look at medicine women? What is a fairy? What is that connection to nature that was so powerful to them? I mean, even inspired in their language, this connection to trees, this connection to nature, a connection to spirit.
Okay, oh my goodness. All right. The Celts were also known as the Gaels, and okay. So there is a rich shamanic tradition throughout Europe, whether we're talking about Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, throughout Europe, the British Isles, and those people were animist, and so to the Celts, nature is treasured, and it's understood that spirit is in everything, and can be felt. And so there's something the Irish called the Natri Nome, which means the sacred three, and it was the gods, the ancestors, and the land spirits. And there were different spirits of place, the genius loci, you could call them. And so there were certain areas of the land where you would go as a traveler and you would feel welcome. And there were other areas where you would get this sense like, this is not, we shouldn't be here. And that indicated the spirits in that particular area. And so, and this is again, this is around the world. Every culture had their spirits, that their land spirits that they uh respected for the most part. And this is something else that the Irish, the Scottish would do is they would leave offerings. So you would leave the first milk of the cows, you'd leave the butter. And I write about this in my book. And you'd leave those offerings. There was one spirit called Gruagach, and so that spirit was out in the fields with the cows. And so when you milked those cows, you always left a wee bit of milk. There were these stones that had kind of little grooves in them, and they were known as Gruagach stones. And so you leave a little offering of milk for the fairy. And the fairy encompassed a number of different beings, and the Irish word is the she. And so that is what I call them because they've said to me in the poetic transmissions, they refer to themselves as the shining ones you call the she. And they've taught me a bit of the art of magic and to realize that magic and these beings, they haven't gone anywhere. Our minds have been led like the Pied Piper into other areas, shall we say. And also I think language is so important. And oh my God, how I wish I could speak Gaelic. Just really still trying to figure out the correct pronunciations. It's not an easy language to learn, but we know that the Native American children were put in schools in Canada and the States, and they were not allowed to speak their language. They did the same thing to the Scots and the Irish. And I think also of the incredible importance of the mother tongue. And, most of us, we just speak English. And English can be, of course, a beautiful language. It's all in how you use the language. But at the same time, the loss of the mother tongue, I think, is a huge piece. And what really initiated that was this sort of education, and especially around the early 20th century and into rural Ireland, Scotland, this education was, and not to mention also the industrial age, it was seducing people away from this traditional connection that they had with the land, with the spirits of the land. And we see this everywhere. And so that, you were sort of shamed for it in a sense, or mocked. There was a lot of mockery and dismissal. We still see it today, of course. So, and when people think of the fairy today, it's just like Tinkerbells and these little sprites from these Victorian pictures of these little elves and whatnot. And the she means mound in Gaelic. And so they were known as the people of the mounds. And so there is a whole sort of mythic history of Ireland, and you had these people, magical people known as the autodidact, who were the sort of gods and goddesses of Ireland. And they showed up in these dark clouds, and they settled in the northern part of Ireland. And the north is thought of as the place of magic, and that is what they practiced. And at some point, the Milesians showed up, the sons of Mill. And the Milesians had their poet Emergin, who enchanted the land. And so they came, and there ended up being a huge battle between the two races. And the Milesians won. And so the Tuatha chose to go beneath the ground. And so beneath the mounds, they'd be found in stone structures, beneath stone structures, and fairy forts, they call them, and beneath the water as well, springs and wells, and so they were these just glorious, gorgeous beings. noble, shimmering, and again, some friendly, some to be avoided. And over time, they just became diminished. And I really see these old sort of Victorian images as quite the diminishment of them. And then they were thought to be sort of enchanters. And then, we're left with Tinkerbell on Disney, which I'm not a big fan of. And I heard Thomas Sheridan, he's quite a character, and I really like this guy. But anyway, he talked about how you could look at it from a psychological viewpoint of the Tuatha representing the right brain and what we are in touch with all of that. And it's instinctual and deeply connected and open to the greater mystery. And then that went beneath the ground. And then solely the intellect took over. And so then we were sort of above the ground, and all of that magic is simmering beneath us, but everyone's sort of caught in the intellect. And I just thought that was very interesting. And so, yes, this is being diminished. And then through this sort of parochial schooling, that has further, removed us from that. And ultimately, the whole reason for forced schooling came from the Prussian education system. And it was about producing compliant, unquestioning workers for the state. And so that began in Germany, which was Prussia at one point, and then came to this country and, spread all around the world because it was so effective. And so here we are. And, I value, as did the ancient Celts, both the mystical and the practical. And I started studying law because I was looking up as much information as I could find on the women Druids, because the Celts were quite egalitarian. And so I discovered that, these women Druids, the Druids were highly, highly educated. 20 years was their education. And so they were high masters of law, as well as botany, medicine, astronomy, and of course, magic as well. But they were the learned caste and for their people. And so as well were the fili poets. And so the Roman accounts talked of the occasional Druid woman who would be called to judge on a major matter. And that really spoke to me. This was however many years ago for me, maybe 10 or 11 years ago. And I started studying natural law, and I continue in that study because I realized it is a spiritual study and profound study. And in Ireland, you had the Brehon laws, were different laws that they held dear. But in any case, so the main takeaway for me of what the Celts were in touch with is their love of nature and the honoring of the cycles of nature. And also of the great sovereign lady of Ireland, of Era, and they were all about sovereignty. So that spoke to me as well. And we did have true nobility at one point. We do not anymore anywhere. Our current sort of kings and queens are quite unimpressive in my opinion. But in any case, nobility in that the tribe chose who was to be king. And then that king, this was in Ireland, would have to lie with the sovereign queen of the land. And she would ultimately have the say of who would be king. And then, but being the king wasn't based on because, your family has all the power. Because once you were a king, you were serving the land and its people. And you went to battle with your fellow men. And if the king was injured, if his arm was cut off, his hand, whatever happened, he couldn't be king anymore. Or if the crops failed, not going to be good for the king. So it was this deep and profound connection that the nobility had with the land itself. And that also speaks to me because now we are living in it's a commercial overlay. And I used to have a lot of charge around the Bible, having grown up Catholic, until I started working with a law mentor a number of years ago who said, Shonagh, you got to let go of your biases with the Bible because it's a law book. So it was a whole different way of looking at that. But in any case, the oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought. What was my point of that? Talking about the sovereignty of the land. I just lost it, Jason. I'm so sorry. I had a point to make. Oh well. In any case,
No problem.
I will say I was, deeply, deeply inspired by the bards, by the druids, by their knowledge, their grasp of, again, the mystical, and the practical. And I see how important it is now because there are a number of people who are, they're wanting to open these retreat centers, to bring people in, to buy land, to share it with other people, to create these intentional communities. And I think to myself, that's great, guys, but you better learn law. Oh, you better understand what we're in, because that's right. We're in this commercial overlay. So the Bible, it's all metaphor. But Satan, quote unquote, it's not some dude with horns and a tail. That represents a force that rules the dead. And so we're in a fictional realm. The commercial realm is all fictional. That's why your name is in all capitals on all your commercial documents. It's fiction. And so I see our reality is being created for us by these fabulously wealthy and power hungry people who are kind of controlling the big chess pieces. And in so doing, it has disconnected us from our folk, from our motherland, and ultimately from our connection, deep connection, which is in each one of us, and kind of sucked us into this artificial system in which we are living. And most people don't even know kind of how that system really works, what are the legalities, and then what is the true law, the natural law. They've lost that connection. And so I just see all of this as so dearly important for us now that we have to call back our folk soul, which is something Steiner spoke to. This is what has been lost, is the folk soul. And knowledge. And ultimately, I collect quotes. My favorite quote says, every man has two educations. The first he's given. The second, more important, he gives to himself. And so we have to give that education back. We have to revisit our roots and go inward, and also work with the teacher of nature. So I don't own a television. I don't read media. So much of it, if not most of it, is even the so-called alternative media. It's all captured. Most of it is, just garbage. And so I always say, look to the ancients and to nature as your teachers, and you will come into a level of knowledge you never even knew was there. And this is something that Celts they cherished that, and they cherished the power of the word. So I'll just stop there.
Amazing. Also, just on a side note, it looks like some construction is started right next to me. So if you hear a jackhammer in the background, that's what that is. That's amazing. It's something that, I mean, I actually wanted to get more into the mystical first and then the rational, but you kind of brought up this more rational. Uh, and I think often in this plant medicine world, for lack of better terms, it's often something that's also overlooked. I think sometimes we get kind of, as you're speaking about these intentional communities, um, this idea, wow, it's very loud.
When I speak, this
Yeah.
is good.
Um, but this idea that everything is magical, everything is mystical, and you know, you mentioned this word that I think is very powerful, which is the idea of sovereignty. And even the name of a lot of these plants has something to do, the traditional names for them has something to do with sovereignty, with freedom, with wisdom, with knowledge. You know, and you were kind of mentioning that this idea of kind of the capture of the mind, and I think in the podcast with Kathy, you mentioned that idea that Steiner has of the Arabon, and how, you know, it's very easy for the mind to get captured. Even many indigenous people speak about that. I mean, even in the land where you are, there's this idea of wetiko, the parasite of the mind. In a lot of shamanic traditions, they speak about this idea of the parasites. The parasite can take over the mind, or as you mentioned, Satan, the devil. Um, you know, it also it reminded me of a very good book by Jonathan Haidt called "The Coddling of the American Mind," and it's more about the educational system, but how the mind has really been coddled and controlled. And for me, one of the really powerful things about this plant is teaching this idea of sovereignty, of freedom, of breaking beyond that, breaking beyond the illusion, to see the world as it actually is. So I find it very fascinating that you're also really interested in law and truth and justice in a way. And I think a lot of these words have also been kind of hacked in a way. You know, we speak about justice, but it's usually a justice that only fits into our own worldview, and we don't see the other side of the justice. Or we speak about truth, but it's a truth that's only the truth that we want to hear, but not the truth from the other side. And I think that deeper aspect of wisdom is really understanding that. Um, you know, even one of the without getting too political, but one of the, you know, the big events that we all just came out of, COVID, it was, I think, very much a demonstration of that control of the mind, about that taking away of sovereignty, uh, about the idea, you know, even speaking about kind of Steiner, but even, you know, these ideas that we become so rational that all of our focus, all of our worldview, all of our magic is enshrined in man, in humans, in institutions, in governments. And part of that education, I think that you're also speaking of, that Celtic education, even in the West, was this idea of a true liberal arts education, of really understanding the world as a whole, understanding science, religion, mathematics, alchemy, chemistry, cosmology, because only then can you truly have a deeper understanding. But when we give up that sovereignty to whatever authority it is, it's very easy to control us. And I think one of the real beautiful things about this is that idea of sovereignty. So I know that's kind of long-winded, but I find it very interesting that you're interested in law, you know, which also goes to, it kind of de facto means that there is law out there, and that there is something that's ultimately true, which also means that there's something that's good, and it means there's something that's bad. And I think those are ideas that we very much moved away from. We don't like to admit that there is good in the world, or that there is bad in the world, or that there is right, that there is wrong, that there is truth, because that also holds people accountable. And I think we're also living in an age where, you know, it's very easy to give away that accountability, to not have that, to not have that sovereignty, because then we're also very responsible for ourselves as well.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, there's good and evil. Like, yes, all right, it's understood. There's opposites. So they share the same line. And so it's just how much good or how much whatever. But if you cannot discern good from evil, you have no wisdom. Wisdom is the ability, part of it, you know, to be able to have that discernment, you know, to recognize it. And also someone who truly sees. And the shaman is supposed to be the seer for his or her people. has to be able to recognize falsehood, has to be able to see it. And so, no, I will not get too political either, other than to say that these folks who wield the big chess pieces, who move the big chess pieces on this planet, used black magic. And that is as old as the hills. And, we were given something a long time ago. It's known as the trivium and the logical fallacies, to be able to listen to something or read something and be able to see the flaws in the argument of whatever they're trying to sell us. No one is taught that anymore. And so I had to learn that on my own. It's still a study I will do for a long time. But that's like a navigation system. There is a navigation system because we are in a realm that contains both truth and untruth. And the idea is to be able to sort of navigate that with your eyes open and with common sense. And that's why we have even something like Aesop's fables. They're as true today as they were 10,000 years ago. So it was a series of stories using animal characters, but then at the end of each story is a moral of the story. There's or an axiom or a maxim. And this is what drew me into law, the study of natural law, was that my teacher emphasized the importance of the maxims of law because they are as true today. They're true. There is truth. And truth requires no defense. It's obvious. And so, my goodness, oh gosh, we would have conversations for hours and hours. I learned so much from that man. And I just have so much regard for what he gave me, and then really just opened in me this great desire to know more, because I watch what's happening in this planet and how helpless so many people feel. And I think, oh my God, I forget who said it in this country. One of the, I don't know, early fathers of this country or something said, an educated man knows his rights and how to defend them. Well, how many people do you know who know their rights and then much less how to stand on their square and defend them? That's by design. That's by design. Now, there's a maxim of law that says ignorance of the law is no excuse. Why? Because we can learn. We can learn. We've got this internet and it's all out there. It's a noble study. It's a spiritual study, and law stands for land, air, water. And it's everywhere. I mean, it's nature's laws. Actually, this might be a good time. I could maybe share one of the poetic transmissions for you because, okay, this was from last September, so 2023. I was in the mushroom. And so when I go in, I just want to sit curled at the feet of the sages. That's how I feel. I just go in open heart, humble, seeking wisdom. And so the she speak to me, and they were talking about nature's laws that are in your body. In other words, we are nature. And so we ignore her cycles, her laws at our peril. And look at us. People are so sick these days, and not just physically, but mentally as well, and emotionally. Oh God, there's so much suffering. So I also want to quickly say that I think nature is calling her children back through her plants. And so we have many of these herbalists who are doing beautiful work, and also her psychoactive plants. And it's not a guarantee that you're going to wake. I've had, many a conversation with people who work with these, and I'm just like, are we talking about the same thing? Like, you're every bit as indoctrinated as you were 10 years ago. But others of us, it really does sort of crack everything open. And it's like Terence McKenna said, you look around and go, this is bullshit. Terence said, culture's not your friend. Maybe, a long time ago, in these sort of more traditional cultures. I'm not romanticizing them because they had their issues, but I mean, people were sort of more intact and connected to their roots and their folk soul. But now culture is deplorable. So in any case, but I'll read this one piece for you because this is beautiful. I'm just going to call this up here. And so they said, use the power in your mind, and to this body please be kind. It has served you all this time. Heed the wisdom in this rhyme. Your body's asking for a break. At this age, there is more at stake. You do good things for this body, and in other ways you're naughty. Balance is what we advise. This is coming from the wise. If you stray from nature's laws, you'll be held within the claws of demon dragons that will cause punishment for broken laws. And so this message that we speak is meant for strong as well as meek. Nature's laws are in your body. That is why you can't be naughty. Your body will tell on you. It knows what you're supposed to do. These laws aren't meant to torment you, but this is why the wise are few. Law extends everywhere you look. It's a very ancient book, written in the skies for you. Those who study are imbued with knowledge and with might. Its knowledge gives those good wings flight. This is law that you aren't taught. What is poison, what is not. Mistakes are made that help you learn. That is why wisdom is earned. And for some, the same mistake, over and over the coals are raked. That sad drug they put everywhere, sugar, causes much despair. Stripped of all nature's attire, it creates a mighty fire. Not one of life, but one of death. It has shortened many breaths. This is sobering, we know, but you have much more here to grow. It is with love that we deliver. This arrow belongs in your quiver. Nature's laws will sort it out. Those laws are the ones with clout. Of course we'll help you, daughter dear. Lean on us, we're always near. We tend to this ancient seer. Let us make your pathway clear. Shadow hides all that is hidden. That is where what is forbidden thrives in secret revelry, hidden from the cavalry. Those shadow beasts are in your gut, and with their teeth they like to cut upon the sugared things you eat. You're feeding them with all that's sweet. Deep they live within the bowels, living off you with their scowls. They are wreaking havoc there. This will lead to much despair. And so, dear, nature speaks to you in a pressing way, and you must attend to your good ship. This bad habit you will nip. Drink your broth and eat your kraut. Coax those little monsters out, for they prefer the sticky sweet that festers with your stomach's heat. A toxic bruise created there that spreads its ferment everywhere. And so these words convey a warning, and we know it sounds alarming. Your discipline, it must extend to what you eat, so that you end a cycle long that's run its course. We offer you a different horse to take you on a path of health that is the true measure of wealth. Hopefully our voice is heard, and you will end all this absurd behavior that is beneath you. You have a lovely cauldron's brew. We want to see a healthy stew. And so that demon you will slay, and you will do this the right way, that honors the Creator's grace. 'Twill put a smile upon his face, for dear, he wants the best for you. And so you'll step into a new life that calls you to its side. Of nature's laws you will abide. Guidance comes from nature's laws, how not to fall into the claws of hungry demons who will eat everything they see is sweet. Yes, dear, this is our message clear. Fix that one, and you will steer yourself into waters clear.
Mm, beautiful.
Thank you. Uh, so nature's laws, they're in us. And the body knows what it needs, what it's supposed to have. And Creator has given us of this beautiful garden that we live in everything we need to maintain radiant health. And just nature is our teacher. And we have an overlay now of this commercial system that says, oh, no, we've got the answers for you. Come, we'll school you, we'll educate you, just not an education, we'll indoctrinate you. And so, and this has happened like slow boiled frog, to where people have been utterly become divorced from nature. It's not rocket science, I always say. She has all the answers. And I do think it's interesting that the shamans around the world, in their training, they would have to go out into nature in silence and observe and listen and connect. And I'll quickly say, for the training of the seer poets of old Ireland, which I've just seen like just these little connections in my own self-work, they trained in darkness through something called incubation. And so they would begin their training at Samhain around Halloween, when the days were shorter, the nights were longer. And they would be given the instruction by their teacher, and they would go into these houses of darkness as daylight was breaking. And they would have the assignment, and they were in silent darkness. And it was thought to be they were in the cauldron, or the womb of Bridget, who's the muse of the poets, as is Bowen, as is Carrie Dwen. And that is where they would seek that poetic inspiration. So where's that coming from? It's coming from the other world, which is connected to the imagination. Jung would call it the collective unconscious. They were keying into that, and then using the power of emotion and what they had learned to stew, essentially, these stirring and beautiful works of art with the power of the word, and then bring that forth. And this is what is needed. Again, I think the silence piece is very important, because, in the psychedelic world now, you've got all these soundtracks. People are selling their different soundtracks for journeying to this music and that music, and that's great. Music is amazing. I've never done it personally, because I always, from the get-go, followed Terence McKenna, lying down, eyes closed in silent darkness. And I've done that all these years. The only sounds I will accept are the sounds of nature. I don't want music. And again, I know it's amazing, but that silence, we're so overstimulated. And so many people are afraid of the silence, of their own silence. And yet that is the deep well where the resources are found, where you're not getting any kind of outside influence. You're in there, and everything's in there. Our demons, our dragons, our mystical sages, and everything in between is found there. And that is so important, this overstimulation. And it's not just sort of in this cacophony of, messages through all these devices. It's also the very Wi-Fi itself. And these 5G cell towers that they're putting up absolutely everywhere. God knows what happens when those things get turned up all the way. But that is causing interference in the actual field. And we know that because it's affecting the honeybees, which I have 3 hives that I am taking care of, and migrating birds. It's causing interference in the natural harmonic of this planet. So anyway.
So these transmissions that you received, that was something that opened up when you began working with mushrooms, and because it's also, as you write about, it's even this word shamanic, I think it's very useful, and at the same time, it encompasses many things. And I think one of the things that I find very interesting is often when people come to this work, they're looking for or expecting very certain things based on what they've heard or what the potentialities are. But we're all unique. We're all different. We're all a unique manifestation of God. So obviously, our experience can't be someone else's experience. It's literally impossible. Certainly, there can be archetypes of, like you were saying, clairsentience, or different things that we can be pulled towards. But certainly, there's many different ways that we can manifest ourselves, that we can connect to nature, to spirit. And as you were writing in the book, that was one of the kind of the archetypal ways that people could be affected by spirit, was through the power of the word. Because the word is very powerful. I mean, even like speaking of the Bible, like in the beginning was a sound, a sound, a word. It can also be seen as the unmanifest, as spirit, as God becoming manifest. It's taking something that's unseen and making it seen. It's the power of creation, which is one way of looking at it, is the highest form that you can honor God, is to be the creative essence of God, that's the nature of humans, is to create. And so the word is very strong. What was that like for you? I mean, maybe personally for you, what that experience was like, and then also kind of reflecting on the Celtic tradition, and that was something that was seen as very powerful. The ability to see through the power of the word.
I'm trying to remember what was happening for me in terms of when the poetic was coming through. Yes, yes. It was when that woman, the very first person who flew out to work with me. And again, I never set out to do these kind of retreats. And so when she came, we were up in the rainforest in Washington State. And so I did the mushroom with her, which I wouldn't do anymore. I stay very sober and sort of alert. But in any case, we were lying down, and she had this gorgeous long red hair. She's as Irish as Paddy's pig, as they say. And so we're lying next to each other, and I had my recorder, because by then I knew, gosh, sometimes, they speak through, so just in case something comes. And we were in darkness, and I hear singing all around us, and it's women's voices in a different language. And then it occurs to me, I think they're singing in Gaelic. That's Gaelic. And then the men's voices joined in, and it was indescribably beautiful. And there are stories of the music of the other world. And then a message came in pure rhyme. And so I just whispered it quietly. She was deep in her journey. And I received 4 of them, and I call those messages from the old gods that came in. And at that time also, I was running in the forest. And that will take you into a mild trance state. They speak of the running high, and I was a runner for the better part of my life. And one time in the woods, this poetry came through, and I was like, it's like it pierces through a veil in the mind, and they just pour forth. And then I was like, oh my God. So I just sort of tried to remember. And then as soon as I got home from that run, I put pen to paper, and the whole thing just poured forth. And after that, I would bring my digital recorder on my runs. And it didn't happen very often, but if it did, I had my recorder. And it would just come, and I could feel it just coming from the trees. These incantatory messages, if you will. And there is a very old tradition. I also discovered that the original shamans, quote unquote, were the poets. And so in Mexico, we have Maria Sabina, who is just such an eloquent example of bringing forth this beautiful poetry from the mushroom spirits who were speaking through her. And in many different traditions, that would be the case, where the oracle or the seer or the shaman, whatever, it's all the same thing, would go in and bring through the oracles of Delphi as well. They would speak in hexameter, poetic, dactylic hexameter, it's called. So it's a type of meter or rhythm in poetry. And they were in this expanded state. And so when it would come through me, when it was done, always in the same way that I would be after a mushroom journey where I had that experience with those beings, I don't know, just a humility, just to like, oh my God, this is beautiful. I don't write like that. I don't write like that. I mean, I'm a decent writer, but I mean, poetically, I don't. And so I recognized it. And I think that's the piece as well. Like this is coming through, it's piercing through a veil. It comes in. When I got home from Scotland and they were speaking to me, and it was often in the liminal state of as I was awaking. It got to the point where I would bring my digital recorder to bed with me because I'd be like just starting to wake up, but not quite asleep, in that in-between state. And then this poetry would be just sort of coming forth almost like a stream of water. And then I would sort of snap awake like, oh my God, whoa, and then I would record it. And I have two very long ones that came through. One's I call Stone Circle Whispers. The other is Old Spirit Speak. And I think it was Old Spirit Speak. It was in the morning. It came through, but then I had to make breakfast for my daughter and take her to school. And I was like, oh God, I have to do this. And it stopped. And then when I got home, as soon as I walked back in the door afterwards, it began again and it finished itself. And then when it's done, nothing. And that's the other thing too. It's not something I can just like, oh yeah, just kind of come up with something and then post it on social media. It's not how it works. And so I had 3 days in a row, I think this was over a year ago, often almost a year and a half ago, where I was on my morning walk. And I walk every morning very early in the morning. I just love to hear the birds. And that is my deep connection time. And a transmission came through in pure poetry. And so I always have my digital recorder with me. And so I spoke that in. And then the day 2, another one, day 3, another one, 3 being a very, very magical number to the Celts and other cultures as well, 3 and 9. Day 4, I was ready. Like, okay, let's go. Nothing. So it's like, that makes it to me also so magical where you realize, okay, this is, it's not something to take for granted. It's not, and so much we take for granted today anyway, right? Just everything. And no, it's a gift. It's a gift. And poetry itself is its own language. And I know, we all know there's something that shifts subtly within us when we're about to hear a poem, or if we're going to write a poem, it's completely different than writing just a letter or a story or whatever it is. It's very different. And people back in the day spoke poetically. And Martin Prechtel is an amazing man, shaman. He's in the Southwest, and he's written a number of books. And God, the way that man speaks is so beautiful. And I read his first book, Secrets of the Talking Jaguar, and just his speech is it's beautiful. The second book he wrote was called Long Life, Honey in the Heart. Well, that's a greeting. That's how the Mayan people would greet each other. So you think of also the beauty of language and how stirringly moving it can be. And that is something also that I think we need to call back. And especially you can see how language has really circled the toilet, with this sort of internet and people anonymous and posting and commenting and canceling and just all this. And especially, you mentioned COVID years. Oh boy, did people get ugly and mean. And I was the recipient of that in mid 2020. And that's when I was like, I'm out of here. And I got off all social media. I stopped my newsletter. I was incredulous at where people's heads were at through the incantation of media, which was casting its own black magic spell through repetition and specifically crafted words that captivate the imagination. My publisher, Steve Crimmy, is finishing up a book that he calls Hermes Runs the Game. And he is quite the scholar. And he is writing about those years and how that whole piece was actually an inverted ritual. So, you have the ritual, sacred ritual of how it's done, and then you have the inversion of it. Because what is that darkness or that evil? It's just simply the inversion of light, if you will. So anyway, kind of lost my track there, but yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And what are kind of from that Celtic perspective, are there other archetypes that someone who embodies that wisdom as it can also manifest, like, so obviously through the word, through poetry, I would imagine through plants or through ritual, I would imagine through sight, through healing. Are there different ways that connection can manifest?
Music. Music, right? Oh my goodness. So, in fact, was it I quoted her in my book, Lady Gregory. Was it Lady Gregory? In any case, she said that poetry and music are thought of as gifts from the other world or gifts from the fairy. And so, gosh, and of course, every culture has its beautiful, unique music, and so the Celts are no exception. And the bards back in the day would play the harp, and that is so transporting. That seems like an instrument that was gifted from the other world. And so that is, yes, another medium for that. And again, we can see how things have become so corrupted. And I know I probably sound like an old fart, but like the music today is just a lot of it is it's more sort of incantations, and they're not healthy or necessarily uplifting. And of course, the Celts, the Irish, especially the ballads. There's beautiful, sad, heart-wrenching ballads. And in fact, I mentioned this in my book, and I would invite people interested to listen to Joan Baez did she sang this old poem from Snaravo up in the Orkneys about the Selkie folk. And the Selkie were the seals, but it was said that they were a type of sort of fairy being, and they would shed their seal skins every so often, and the women would sun themselves on the rocks. And every so often it was a man of the sea, a fisherman, who would steal the seal skin of that Selkie woman, and then she would be his wife until at some point maybe she'd go back to the ocean. And then the Selkie men would come in. They were far more amorous, and they would take an earthly woman as a lover, but they wouldn't stay long. And there's a beautiful poem that this woman up in Snaravo wrote. And oh gosh, I wish I knew it by heart. But this Selkie man has impregnated this woman, but she's not sure sort of really who the father is, and is not around. And he comes and explains to her, I am the father of your child. And he is a Selkie. And he gifts her a bag of gold in return for his son, and says to her, you will marry a gunner, one of these seal hunters, and he will someday kill. myself and your son. And it's like just deeply sad and moving. And Joan Baez sings this gorgeous, moving song about that. And I think it's called Silkie, Silkie. You can listen to it on YouTube. And yes, it's sad, but it's like it opens the heart. And this is also the purpose of music. And I remember reading a story about Pythagoras, and he understood this, and he spoke of the music of the spheres of the planetary bodies themselves. It's this vibratory field that we're in, and everything has this specific vibratory signature. But he tells a story of how he was walking down a road, and there was a drunken man, bang, 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 on the door of, I guess, his lover or something. And there was another musician playing something on that road. And Pythagoras went over to him and said, please don't play that. Play this. So it was a whole different tune. And it affected the drunken man so that he calmed down and he walked away. And so there's a vibratory field. I think that's ultimately at the bottom of everything we're talking about. And so poetry creates a vibratory field. Music creates a vibratory field. Beautiful art, whether it's, Smithcraft, paintings, pottery, whatever it is, right? There's a vibratory field, and it's felt. We have that ability to feel that and be stirred by it. And then in sharp contrast, I have a friend from the Netherlands, and he sent me this whole thing he did of architecture around the world, communist, capitalist, traditionalist. And you look at the communist architecture and the brutality of it, and it's ugly, it's dead, it's just deadening. And then you look at the capitalist, think Times Square or whatever, of, just like, it's almost like there's just an insanity, and build. And it's just like, it's not pretty. And then you look at traditionalists and think of like, whatever, the thatched roof, beautiful Irish cottages, or, Vienna, just these beautiful old structures, and you're just like, you are uplifted by it. And so that's a vibratory field. And if there's one word that's synonymous with the Celts, I would say it's beauty. They cherished nature and that beauty of nature, and they brought it through a number of mediums. And this is what we need. We need to really call back that beauty and create that beauty that genuinely stirs the soul. And, I was lived in Redmond, Washington for a while. And before I moved, they were like rebuilding the downtown and putting up all these condos, and all these little sort of mom and pop shops were getting the heave ho. And then they put this sculpture, which is just a black cube, which, by the way, has its own esoteric meaning. But anyway, just this black cube in the middle of like, no one even sees it. Like, you just walk. In other words, ugly art is part of what is kind of taking us over right now, like just like dead. And it does nothing to uplift the spirit. It doesn't want to. It just wants us being productive slaves. And realistically, we are in a war right now. And yes, you could say, okay, wow, world war is definitely brewing. Yeah, but ultimately, it's a spiritual war. And it's a war between the synthetic and the organic. And what is the synthetic doing through the internet? And Steiner warned about this, and it's taking over the mind. This is the Ahriman that Steiner spoke of. And I see those beings as threshold guardians, as terrifying as they are. They're meant to be. Essentially, it's like, well, humans, are you ready for this next step? Because there's no riffraff that's getting in there. So we're going to throw you everything we've got. Let's see what you've got. Let's see how far you've come. Can you see this challenge and recognize it, and not put your head in the sand, and not have magical thinking? There's a big difference between magic, true magic, and magical thinking. You know, if I just don't talk about it, it'll go away. No, these are mythic times. We are in a time of myth. We're in it. And so, how do we greet that? And what do we bring to the table? And we don't get to be in preference. No, we have to see everything. And we have to also, I always say, if you want to heal something, you've got to look at it. You can't just put a Band-Aid on it. I realize that's what conventional medicine does. But let's look at the cause. Let's reverse engineer this back. How did this even, gosh darn, where did we go wrong here? Let's examine this and then make a course correction. So I'm calling in the old gods. I've been doing this for a number of years. And it's like we've lost our folk soul, our roots. Well, we got to go back to those because our magic has been co-opted. This is what they do. This is why I'm very careful with organizations and whatnot. I'm like, not sure. Has it been co-opted? Or was it started by the sort of opposing force, if you will, as a kind of to lead people in as a Pied Piper? We have to have our wits about us. This is why I also cherish the mystical and the practical, that law and logic of being able to navigate. We've got to be able to, we have to have our wits about us today. And, all for the sake of our children, truly, because their minds are being stolen, they are corrupted in just the most appalling ways, and which stifles that innate creativity. I think of how unique each and every one of us are. There's an axiom that says what is like is not the same, for nothing similar is the same. We're all unique. What is that? That's the genius of the creative, capital C. Nothing is the same, which is just extraordinary. And yet we're coming into this sort of, we're in it, this collectivism, this you're all the same. It's like, no, nothing is the same. And it will not allow for anything unique or anything, highly creative that brings in something, very new and stimulating and uplifting and stirring. So that I know is what we are tasked with. And again, it doesn't have to be, putting it out there, but just even in our own family or our own community. And that is ultimately the job of the seer, the oracle, the medicine woman, the medicine man, the wise woman, wise man, the artist. Terence McKenna said the artists are the shamans of the culture. For sure, they're channeling, they're bringing through, they've connected with that embossed, the seer poets of Ireland would call it, that poetic inspiration.
Can you speak more about that idea of logic? But you mentioned that a few times, logical fallacies. And I think it's very interesting. Even logic, it's that idea of logos, which has to do with the word, with principle, which again is also connected to law. And again, there's so many details, but also I think I see things in a very similar way where we are being removed from that logos, from the power of that word, from the power of using our minds to discern. And I think, much like you said, working with plants, doing initiations, I think is a very powerful way to bring that about, but it's certainly not a universal remedy, because certainly there's a lot of people who seem to not connect to that as well. But even speaking about the Celts or the Greeks or traditional societies all over the world, they really valued that logos, that word, being able to see things. I mean, even that word seer, it means to see, and many plants were designed to allow us to see. Many of these rituals with the Celts or the Greeks, I mean, I think maybe more and more people are becoming familiar with that, but I think even our own traditions, which we often kind of trace back to the Greeks. I mean, those people like Pythagoras or Marcus Aurelius, these scholars, these seers, these wisdom people, they valued that. They valued the logos. They valued that idea of logic, of really being able to see things. And even the shaman was often a word for shaman. Even that word itself, sama in Siberian means to see, the one who sees, the one who knows. And so it does seem like there's something that's very powerful that's connected with shamanism in a broad sense and that ability to see that logos, the word. And and I find that very fascinating, the logical fallacy, because it means, I think we all get very attached to our own worldview, to our thoughts, to our mind, and it's very difficult to shake someone out of that, because we can have beliefs, but we often only see it from one point of view, and we don't follow that thread through to the bigger picture or to the more microcosmic picture as well. And I think one of the roles of the shaman, as you said, was to shake people out of that worldview. It was to give that slap, to break someone down, to open something up so that we could get much more in touch with truth, with logic, with the logos.
Yes, yes. And so in these cultures around the world where the the class of seer, shall we say, was trained, this is what we're missing in this modern culture. So we have these psychedelics and people are, going to different places. And of course they're seeking, right? They were seeking for something deeper. But we're missing the training, which is been replaced by a lot of propagandist stuff and ideologies that don't necessarily belong. These people were highly trained, and it would begin with grammar. So the trivium is grammar, logic, rhetoric. And so grammar, the words that you're hearing or reading, and logic is your ability to be able to kind of parse through what you just heard or read and ask, where are the inconsistencies? Is there any kind of, is this person negating what they just, how are they getting their argument forth to me? Does it even make sense? And the way you do that is through the logical fallacies. And this came out of Greece, and I'm sure that entire area, made use of this. It's very, very old. And so there's a list of logical fallacies, and it's in Latin and English. And I'll get to that in a sec. But once you kind of have an understanding of that, so you're reading you're thinking critically. You're not just accepting it at face value. Then comes the rhetoric, and that's your ability to speak to it. And there would be very highly trained orators who understood that, and they knew how to twist their words and how to kind of lure in the public, whether they were, in a sort of circular stage in Rome or Greece, or, behind a camera here in our day today, and they're very skilled at weaving their words, but in a way that is very seductive and misleading. And this is why you need this sort of structure, this foundation, so that you can navigate, because this stuff's not old. Propaganda that's thousands of years old, right? So the logical fallacies, I will name the very most common one, and that's the ad hominem, and it means attack the man. So again, we saw these past few years. God help and save anybody who was going, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's actually correct. Oh boy, you were destroyed. And you were destroyed how? People calling you names and terms. And we're tribal. And so way back in the day, long, long time ago, if you were cast out of the community, that was certain death. Because the forest, the natural world beyond sort of what had been established was a dangerous place. And if you were on your own, you were in big trouble. And so that's in us. And so no one wants to be, or most people, they want to just kind of fit in and, And also, and this is human nature, most people actually don't necessarily want sovereignty and freedom. They're very comfortable kind of in the herd. And that's just human nature. And so if people were taught this, okay, so if we got in a conversation and then we got into an argument together, we, by the way, used to do that often. And you'd have just a good old argument, point counterpoint. And, you'd agree to disagree maybe at the end. And then we could have a fight on who's going to pay the bill for lunch, like that kind of thing. But it's like, it's all good. You don't see that anymore today. So people also get very emotional. This is through conditioning. It's all through conditioning, so, and in an argument, if you get emotional or I get emotional, we gotta just end that right there, because when you're in emotion, you can't access the higher order thinking. And so that's why, the rational, the logical, you want to sort of keep the emotions out of it. We're discussing a specific topic here. And, so if I didn't like something you said, which shouldn't even be something that I didn't like, but whatever, if I disagreed with something you said and I'd called you a name or a term, most people automatically, they're like, no. So they abandon the argument. And now they're trying to defend themselves from this accusation, this name, or this label that they've been called. Instead of, if we had the knowledge to say, whoa, wait a minute, you just called me a name. Do you have a cogent counterpoint or not? Give it to me. Maybe whatever, they huff, they storm off, or they call you another name. You just say, look, all right, that's not an argument. This is over. We're going to end this. We're done. This is ridiculous. And we'll return to this at a point when, we can greet each other respectfully and intellectually. But no one does that. Instead, they're terrified of being labeled. And this is, of course, it's weaponized, right? So, and people were taken down, my God, over the past few years, right? And they're just careers destroyed, and in the herbalism, like it all over the place, people were falling for this stuff. And, just as an example, won't go into too much detail, but when I was on Facebook, so it was mid 2020, and I just posted, I don't even remember the article itself, but it was sort of just whatever, speaking to like, I think we're being hoodwinked here. And it was like a nuclear bomb went off on my page, and I was like, oh my God. But what saved me was my study of this, because I was going down to all the attacks. I was like, ad hominem, appeal to emotion, appeal to authority, all this. So appeal to authority, that'd be another one where it's like, well, one of the big ones was, I follow the science. What does that even mean? That means nothing. What's your point? Right? So, but because people are repeating these slogans that have been burned into their minds through constant repetition, it's meaningless. If you're parsing through, it's like, where's their argument? That's just an advertising slogan, right? So when we can really see, it's like the scales fall from your eyes and you realize, oh my God, this is ridiculous. This is, so then wisely, I took myself off all social media. I said, I'm done for a good while. And I don't need to be right, quote unquote, or get into this, whatever, because it's a trap. And this is exactly what they want. They want us duking it out. A house divided falls. And oh boy. And that's the other thing, to have eyes to see, to be able to see, this is a manipulation. They're manipulating the herd again. So when, back in 2017, we had Trump and Clinton, both despicable. It's two wings of the same bird. That's what no one seems to, I'm Canadian, I can't vote, but even if I could, I wouldn't, because I don't agree. I don't consent to being governed, especially by, deplorable filth. And so, but in any case, when Trump won, I remember, and again, I had no charge because I could see, but it's like, this is ridiculous. They've given you the choices. They're both despicable. And so he, quote unquote, wins, whatever that means. And I said, oh boy, here we go. That just preemptively ruined Thanksgiving all around this country, because now good people are going to do this, right? And it divided families, everything. And then in comes COVID after Event 201 in 2019 that just happened to be a dry run. And then lo and behold, what a coincidence, it happened. But that's another story. In any case, oh boy, that was like the nail in the coffin, to where people, they not only will they not argue, they don't even know how to argue anymore. You're just done. They're just like shut you out completely. And so if you can recognize that, so through language and this, and also the study of propaganda, read Gustave Le Bon's The Psychology of the Crowd. It's just a little book and it'll blow your mind. And I also did an episode, I have a little podcast called The Mushrooms Apprentice, and the mushroomsapprentice.com, I forget, it was maybe 5 or 6 episodes ago. I go into the education system, the Prussian education system, and how the crowd, the mind is controlled, and mind control as well. When you see that, again, it's back to when someone's sick. No, let's not put a Band-Aid on or give them, a synthetic medication. What caused this? Let's reverse engineer this. Well, it's the same thing with, everything's a metaphor for everything. With language, what's really going on here? And so it's so empowering. And it really, for me, when the Facebook page blew up, I didn't take any of it personally because I could identify the ad hominems. And not a single person, not one person. I finally took my whole page down at the end of the day. I was like, holy God. But not one person said, I read that article and the author wrote this in this paragraph. Here's where I take issue, because no one did that. No one made an argument. Whereas I would say maybe 25 years ago, someone would have. And certainly before that, absolutely, because there's an art to the argument. It's an art form, really. And also, obviously, you want to know your stuff. I know my stuff. You know your stuff. Let's, all right, what you got? It's dynamic. It's, there's a reason why there were, debating teams and that kind of thing. And I don't know, I just absolutely, I love that. I have great regard for that. And it just breaks my heart to see where we're at in terms of communication. And then even with the texting, LOL, OMG, like language it's almost like, not that it's the last bastion, but it's quite a bastion. And it's been completely attacked, co-opted, and weaponized. And again, so then you look to the past of any culture, you look at how they spoke. You look at their poetry. My God, Rumi, the Middle East, like just the gorgeous way that words were used. And then back to what you were saying about the very beginning of the Bible. And God said the word, and the word was God. And that the worlds are created through the power of words. And so we are here today, witness to the debasement of culture, not just in the West, it's happening everywhere. But Joseph Campbell wrote in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, the second section is on the virgin birth. And he opens with a lovely story. And so let's see, it's a creation story. And so the moon is a man. And then Venus, the morning star, is his first wife. And then the evening star is like the harlot. She's his second wife. And so his first wife, they come together and they make love. And then she births all the greenery and, just the beauty and lushness of the land. and they're together for 2 years. And then she leaves, as I recall. And then the second wife comes, and she's much more lusty. She's the evening star. So they make love, and she births the animals and the birds and all of this. And then she births sons and daughters, and many, 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 many of them. And then he also couples with the daughters, whatever, it's a myth. But in any case, and then at some point she leaves. So they represent that creation force, and he leaves also. I think he dies, but in any case, they retreat. And so now we're left with the sons and daughters of the earth to continue with the creation. And for a while, they hold those myths within them and, share them, and people are raised on that and they have that memory. But at some point, they begin to forget. And then we see exactly what we are seeing today, this debasement to where it's a parody now, because it's like they want to replace us with robots. And you have Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum telling us we will own nothing and be happy. How's that going to work? And eat crickets. Like, that's no joke. That's no joke. That's what it is. So it's like we've so lost our sovereignty, our connection to the land and our own sovereignty, that then opportunistic forces come in and say, no problem, we'll handle this for you. We'll tell you how it's done. And you know what? That happens in our own gut, as the beings were explaining to me with my own gut, that sugar, which is very unnatural, though, it's in everything. And it upsets the equilibrium of the gut itself, the hara of the body. And we all have cancer cells and all that crap in us, but it's to a degree, it's managed. Naturally, there's an equilibrium. But as soon as it goes out of balance, those pathogens are opportunistic, and in they come. As within, so without. And so that said, then he says in that myth, he's talking about, then there is a woman, mythically, who she's not part of the culture, and she's a holy woman, right? And then spirit comes in, or that creationary force enters her, and she gives birth to this sort of being of light. And that sort of reawakens and reinvigorates and replenishes, because this is all nature. It's death and rebirth. And as the fate said to me in a journey, death comes first and then the birth. That is how it is on earth. And so we are in the tension of the two right now. We're straddling death and rebirth. And there's, we can't change that necessarily. All we can do is it's like, okay, well, how am I going to create at this time? As I am witnessing things just die away forever, but also to have the wisdom to know something else is being birthed. And if we allow someone else to do it for us, well, that's not good. What action am I going to take? I'm a creator. I'm a daughter of the creator. You're a son of the creator, which means the apple doesn't fall far. So what am I going to birth? And I always joke, because I'm a fiery Aries, I'm not going down on my knees. And also as an Aries, my motto's always been, you're not the boss of me. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to birth something beautiful. And I'm going to share something that will hopefully uplift people and inspire them, because that's what we need. That's what we need. Not this poison and this garbage. We need inspiration, and to remember our folk soul, and also to remember, as the Bible says, the kingdom of heaven is within. It's in here. It's in here and in here. We are a walking, living, breathing wand. And it's not, would you like a wand? No. It's, how big a wand would you like? And are you ready to carry it and wield it?
Beautiful. When I asked you about receiving this transmission, you said that it came to you kind of in this liminal space, or maybe this like hypnagogic space. And It's interesting because much like we were talking about, like with magic, with fairy tales, they're often written off as something that's not real, and it's very similar with dreams as well. And dreaming is something I find fascinating, and it's also a big part of my work. But it's something that we all go into every day. A third of our lives are spent in that space, and it seems like that's where a lot of these teachings come from, or a lot of these kind of shamanic paths are being able to traverse the two worlds. We could call it the dream world, the other world, the realm of the fairies. And often a lot of teaching is coming in those spaces. The ones who saw, or the oracles at Delphi, they were going into an altered space. They were going into that dream space. From whether it's your personal experience or through this worldview of the Celts, what do you take from that dream space? What do you take from that dream world? Because it's something that we all have access to, and yet in our cultures, again, very similarly, we write it off. We even say these things like, "Well, you're just dreaming," or you tell a child like, "Well, I want to be an astronaut," and the adult says, "Well, only in your dreams," or something, as if it's not real, as if it's not tangible, as if there's nothing of value there. And yet the dream world was very, very powerful from all of these traditional cultures.
Yes. Yes, it was. I think it's really important to study symbol and not in a way where you have a dream and you've got your symbol book. That's not how it works. Oh, I had this, so it means this in the book. No, 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 no. But really study mythology, the tarot, because everything symbolism is a language. And so a dream, for instance, as well as a mushroom journey, you can look at that symbolically. And this was something that my late teacher, Brew, was just a master of. And he said this is not something you can learn in a book. It comes through induction. And I would invite anyone interested to read his second book, which is called Avalanche: Heretical Reflections on the Dark and the Light, because he goes into exploration of shadow in there, and also dreams. And you can start to kind of really get what he was touching into. So, and he would say also, and this is so, when you get a dream, same with the mushroom journey, you can't necessarily kind of explain it with the consciousness that we're in right now. You have to shift states of consciousness. And so that liminal space, the veils are lifted in that space, and they don't have to be like up all the way, but they're lifted enough that you're getting more kind of color into what's really what the meaning actually is to that. And cultures were that connection in nature. You realize that mystery is speaking to me every moment of every day. But again, it's like we're in a culture where it's like nothing to see over here, folks. Come on, back to work, everybody. Back to the real world. And again, the real world, quote unquote, has its place, but so does this. We're wired for that. And so when that comes through, or when I have a dream that I remember, I will write it down. And then I'm immediately going into what are the deeper layers and what is the message that is being conveyed, because old texts, be they alchemical or religious, whatever, they're encoded. And the seer poets of old Ireland had their own kind of poetic language. This is the thing too, where it's hard to say, gosh, were they working with psychedelics? I would say yes, they were. Especially, I think, the Amanita muscaria mushroom. They didn't come out and say it. That's not how people expressed back then. It was metaphorical, symbolic, riddles, far more poetic. And so you had to read between the lines. And so the same would be true of a dream or a psychedelic journey, because a lot of them are strange and people are just like, oh my God, what the hell happened? And so it's inviting us to think in a different way, to perceive in a different way. And sometimes, sure, something comes forth and it's just, for whatever reason, to that individual, you realize, this is just doesn't really have much value. It's just this. Although I must say, I've had enough people, in sessions share something and they're like, oh, this is stupid, or this is, I'm like, no, reread that part again, and it's like, no, what about this? So it's that ability, and we all can practice with our own dreams to, again, it's to shift states of consciousness. And Brew would say, channel the teacher. We're multidimensional, or whatever. You're afraid of speaking in public, channel the public speaker. And so you want to work with a dream, channel the master of dream work, or whatever you want to call it, right? So that you are leaving sort of your conscious mind behind. And but also I would say it's the development of that ability to feel, that clairsentience, where you get a sense. And my God, you hear stories of even like surgeons will get that, where they will break the rules of what they were taught because they just had the sense like, no, I think it's this. And just something they can't put their finger on why they know, but they know. And then, they save the day, or whatever the story is, right? So that inner knowing, there's the intellectual knowing, which has its place. And then there is that deep, just inner sense where without, you can't say kind of how it came about or what your kind of reasoning is. You just know. It's like a subversive kind of knowing. And I think that dreams and what happens on a journey and what sort of comes through, they require that in order to really understand kind of what is coming through. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. One of the books I believe you contributed to was, I believe it's called the Psychedelic Mysteries of the Feminine. One of the other interesting things I find in this day and age, kind of as we were talking about truth or things that are very obvious, is this real questioning now of duality and also of masculine and feminine, man and woman. And even in that book, there's this idea that there's this mystery school, or these powers that maybe a woman has simply for being a woman, going back to these archetypes that different people can hold different archetypal abilities. And it's one of the things even that I really felt when I was doing this work and learning and working with people, is that men and women do have archetypal energies, that we're born different, that we have different powers, that we have different gifts. And obviously that those can change. They're not set. Some things can be malleable. But there is a very real difference in our bodies, and even just in the most physical differences, that also, as you said, as within, so without, that also begins to shape our world, our view, our abilities, our power, our sensitivities. What do you find to be some of these more sacred aspects of the feminine that are archetypally different from the masculine, and maybe have you had a chance to think about or experience, like what is the masculine? Because if we're focusing on the feminine, like what do you see as the feminine, and then vis-a-vis that, what do you see as the masculine?
Okay, well, traditionally, even the feminine is the chalice. She's receptive, and she is also the container for life to grow. She had, woman is womb man, so she has the womb, and also then the vaginal portal or doorway through which life comes forth. And also she has the monthly menses. And, there's a lot of talk about this in different throughout different cultures. I sat one time, was very fortunate to sit with a Native American church, a particular group of them. It was an all women's peyote ceremony, but the women there told me, it was mostly Native American, that, when a woman is bleeding, you don't get to sit in the peyote ceremony. And it is understood. They said, these couple of women who were talking to me, that really, when a woman is menstruating, she is more open. She is much more highly sensitive. And of course, there were cultures who think of that book, The Red Tent. They had areas where when women were menstruating, they would, join the other women and just take that time to rest and whatever it was they were doing in there, learn from the elder women. There were initiations around that. And then of course, woman is the ultimate archetype of the mother, and met, of course, by her ultimate counterpart, the father archetype. But so we have the archetype of the mother who, receives, I think, even of sort of the earth being the mother, but she receives constantly the seeds of the father, that she gestates and then just grows constantly, to create this beautiful earthly world that we find ourselves in. And she is the gatherer traditionally. And then the father, it's so interesting, because when I speak to spirit, which I do first thing in the morning as soon as my eyes open, and at night before I go to sleep, and I always address as good father, good mother, good she, and that's who I'm speaking to. And the father, to me, I cherish that archetype. And again, that has been, Brew, my teacher, said the patriarchy wounds its men every bit as much as it wounds its women. Well, our men are being destroyed, as well as our good women. And so that father archetype, that masculine archetype of, the one who holds the sacred seeds of life, my God, and the protector, and the hunter, the warrior. And yes, in the Celts, women could be warriors as well if they chose. And that's the case for other cultures as well. But so women were said, I think, also, by virtue of, I think, especially that blood, the shedding of the blood, that they were sort of in their own sort of blood initiation every month. And that intuition is considered feminine. At the same time, of course, in Jungian understanding, we all have masculine and feminine within us, right? And so there are men who are more in touch with their feminine, and there are women who are more in touch with their masculine, and that masculine being that forward-directed movement. And again, the feminine being more receptive. And many, many years ago, someone asked me an interesting question about my writing process after I wrote Love and Spirit Medicine. And I just blurted out. I said, I think it's like this balance between the masculine and feminine, in that the feminine is the muse. And I get a knock on the door. I open the door, and she's just says, I'm your book, but she's not in form. And the masculine says, fabulous. I'll create the structure. I'll get the outline going. We'll get the paragraphs just so, and you can just sing through. So, and life itself is binary. You can't have life without positive and negative charge. And again, I'm just following the wisdom of the ancients. And because that's held for a long time, and also just observing nature. And it's this beautiful dance of opposites. And so yeah. And by the way, all right, so in the Irish seer poet tradition, there were women as well, but you don't hear about them. It was, mostly men. And then certainly as we look at the hedge schools where, they were being absolutely devastated by the forces around them, they would have to go under these hedges to learn the poets. but they were all men. And there were some superb seers who were men. And in Reverend Kirk's book from the 1600s, the something of elves, fauns, and fairies. Anyway, he interviewed a number of seers, but he said they were mostly men, and he said that, women, and there was a little bit of bias there. Women very seldom would receive this gift. But then, yet we go back to more ancient times, and like Lady Zakukka, who I mentioned, among the Maya, she was a seer, an oracle, the oracles of Delphi, Dodona, all over. So both women and men have those abilities, and yes, there are these differences. Thank God. I mean, I just love that. That makes it interesting. And it also breaks my heart to just see how this horrible wedge that has been deliberately put in to get us to just hate on each other, and it's so damaging. It's so damaging. I've heard so many stories that I, don't care to discuss here, but it just, again, breaks my heart because I don't identify as a feminist because that has been totally co-opted. I think the whole thing was designed. I'm all for women doing whatever they. It's more like the Celts. Yeah, do your thing. I celebrate you. But I'm not going to hate on men, and I'm not going to think that, I like to remind people, just so you know, when women got the vote in this country, guess who voted for them to get the vote? The men. There were men who said, of course they should be able to vote. Yeah, I'm voting yes. Not to say that, of course, women have been dismissed and diminished, and, all manner of terrible things have happened to women, and continue to this day. And that is deplorable. And there are deplorable men. And you know what? There are deplorable women. All this toxic masculinity. I'm like, let's talk about toxic femininity. Oh boy. At the end of the day, we're people. We're people. And what is missing today is compassion. And also forgiveness. And that's what we need because we're talking about people. And I love most people. I'm going to be honest, not all people, but I love most people. And I work with men and women. And I have treasured memories of these men that I've worked with. Just to be able to sit, and I really honor these guys who I work with. Obviously, they're screened. I know who they are, who's coming into my home. But I really honor these men. And we talk about what they're going through right now, and what just all the poison around it. And I just say, I'm cooking for you all week. I'm going to honor you. I'm not going to coddle you. We're going to talk about what's going on beneath those layers. But you get respect here, and treated, as the good soul that you are. And whatever your troubles are, we'll work that through. But I don't buy into any of this garbage that is out there now. No. And I think if you're going to do this work, you need to take a big fat step away from all this toxic shite that is being bandied back and forth, and just the way people are speaking. I don't go there because I see what it is. It's divide and conquer. That's what it is.
Yeah. We very early on, when you were speaking about your initiatory experience with these mushrooms, you said that these beings told you to get your mind right. Kind of reflecting back on that, what do you take of that, and what do you see as your own path of how that's come to fruition, and where do you see that going to?
Well, for me, first of all, it was the way I think, which was, again, this anxiety, this constant worry, this always going to worst case scenario, and also belittling of myself. In fact, one of the lines from one of the transmissions on the mushroom, they said, "You wonder why we speak to you. Daughter, you doubt your own value." And so I had to clear up my belief systems, but also, again, reverse engineering and look back at the woundings, the difficulties, the challenges, and really, really sort through that. I mean, I've been doing a lot of work on myself prior to that, and that's great. But the mushroom will take you even deeper. And they were explaining to me how this is a temple and you must keep your temple clean. And then it's not just that, it's also what, like I was saying just a minute ago, what you allow into your mind. You're going to read all this trash, or you're going to watch these stupid Hollywood movies that are nothing but mind control, sneaking in all kinds of nonsense into your mind. This has to be protected. And so I continue to do, we all, it's a daily deal, to be on top of it. There's a piece of writing I love by James Allen called As a Man Thinketh. He wrote that in 1905. He was riffing off this line from, I think, the parables, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. But the understanding that everything that happens to us, it's because of this. We're creators. And so this is electric, and there's an electromagnetic field around us that we call an aura or an energy field, whatever it is. It's electromagnetic. So as we think, we attract or repel. And so better get this bad boy clear. And it's interesting too, because life is full of initiations. And so there was a profound initiation for me that happened in that first year of mushroom journeys, the whole thing, when I was initiating myself. And I'm in another initiation. And I had one I wrote about the book before I bought my house in Vermont. And I never thought I could do that. I always thought I needed someone to kind of, I just didn't have the self-confidence. I thought there's no way I could make the kind of money to make a house. No, I would need a man to help me. And so my piece was having to kind of work through that with the power of the mind and accomplish something that if you looked at it on paper, and again, it's in the book, you'd be like, what are you thinking? You don't have a regular job. You have barely any money saved. You're going to buy a house like, oh, and it's going to be all these parameters? Yes, dear. A regular, I call them the TV watchers, would tell me that. But I did it through the mastery of this as a man thinketh. And again, I was saying how I've gotten quite cozy with this one-on-one work and in the cocoon of my house, but I'm not working to the extent that I used to with these retreats, and things are changing. And now I have this book and I have to go out there, which I'm not altogether comfortable with. I realized, I'm articulate and I can have these, conversation, but just the thought of, especially now, right, when people are just awful to each other, I'm like, oh my God, what? But they're saying, this is the time is speaking, dear, put this out there. This has come through. And I just know, because of sharing this with the people at my kitchen table and their responses when I would share, one of these transmissions, to realize, no, this does something very positive for people. So you have to put it out there. But then we're back to all that fear and doubt. It's like another hero's journey. Or it's like you have to push through that. And what have I learned after all these years? What is in here? And, temples are supposed to be kept clean, and so we have to constantly be on, when you clean a temple, you don't just clean it and it's done. You have to do that constantly. And so with the mind, it's like always needing to be on myself. I worked with a lovely woman the other day who is a therapist, and things have fallen apart for her, and she said, I'm just so ashamed. I'm a therapist, like this shouldn't happen. And I'm like, whoa, sweetheart, no, let that go. That's a projection. And like, give yourself a break. You're human. You're a woman or a man. Like, shit happens to us. It doesn't matter what your position is. Things fall apart. And I just explained, look, this isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. And you're at a different phase in your life, and this is an opportunity. It's excruciating, but it's an opportunity. Work with it from that. Don't go into, oh, I shouldn't be because I'm that. No, that's not how life works. That's the artificial overlay, that tells us that nonsense. It's like, no, we're nature. And whatever, you were alone for a period of time and then you got involved and, and then it fell apart. That's not a failure. It's saying, the universe saying, all right, look, we threw you another one who's the same pattern. And okay, you fell into it for a few years, but now, whatever, it's going to help you see. So it's changed the way I think, so that I see myself as I'm an initiate. And I'm a teacher, but I'm an initiate. And Brew, my teacher, God bless him, he said when he's teaching, he's channeling the teacher. I love this. He's channeling the teacher. When I'm done teaching, he said, I'm simple Brew, which I also love, so that we don't get overly identified with sort of whatever maybe we are kind of to a certain group of people. It's like, yeah, for a while and then I'm, back to myself, but always kind of just tracking, just keeping this ship, as it were, on course. Because they've said the Holy Grail's in here. It's not out there. It's in here. The wand is in here. And so, but if you have a wand, or a great sword, you have to know how to wield it. And no matter how high you might get in your mastery of that, you must always practice, or you kind of lose your edge. And so they have and it's throughout my book and the Poetic Transmissions, they have emphasized the power of mind and keep bringing me back, to how powerful this is. And stay on yourself, daughter. And nope, you're off in choppy waters. Come on now, steer back. They would call it a course correction, which I love. So it's not this like shaming. It's more like, no, dear, you're off course. Come on now. Bring your ship back. Watch that thinking. Not that if I'm angry, oh, I won't be angry. No. But it's like we don't dwell. We have these emotions. Be in the authenticity of it. But don't dwell there. That's where you get into trouble. And so I don't care how high up in rank or whatever you are in whatever position it is. This is ongoing process. Same with, this shadow. And that understanding that the shadow being that deep psyche, the unconscious, called the unconscious for a reason. That we need to have that deeper meet and greet with the shadow, and entheogens will certainly assist us with that. So we know, I explain to people, it's like being a CEO of you. A good CEO knows what their strengths are, what their weaknesses, where they kind of fall into a rut, and so then a good one will kind of bring people on board who can compensate for their weaknesses to know, what, I suck at that, but you're really, whatever. Instead of, oh yeah, I'm good at everything, and to understand that within ourselves so that we can kind of keep ourselves on course, keep ourselves honest, as it were. So, yeah.
Well, beautiful, Shonagh. We're over 2.5 hours. We're 2 hours 33 minutes.
Okay. Oh, I'm so happy to meet you. I cannot wait to meet you in person. This has just been, I love that flow. Yeah. Yeah,
Likewise.
you are just a gem. Yeah.
Oh, well, likewise, Shonagh. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to share before we bring it to a close?
I think we're good. I think we're really good. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was really just serendipitous how we connected, and just kind of the similarities, even down to Virginia. And I really do. I look forward to meeting you in person one of these days. If people are interested in learning more about you, or getting your book, or reaching out to you, what's the best way they can do that?
The best way is my website, which is my name, Shonagh, Shonagh, home, Home, so shonaghome.com. And it's all on my site. The podcast is on there, my courses, my books, my sessions, all of that is there, including how to connect with me. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again. I really enjoyed this and just your wealth of wisdom, and you speak beautifully. So you have no reason to shy away from putting yourself out there. So I really wish you the best, and I look forward to finishing the book and connecting in the future. And down the line, I'd love to have you come back on if I think we could talk for another 2.5 hours easy. So. Thank you so much again. It was really beautiful to connect with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you in Virginia one of these days.
Beautiful. All right, everyone. That's it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Shonagh. I think she's a really fascinating woman. It was really a pleasure to have her on and to sit down and really pick her mind and listen to her wisdom. So I hope and think you'll really enjoy that episode. My next guest, I'm not sure. I have a number of people that I'm thinking about trying to line up, but still nothing is set. So we'll see what happens. But as always, I hope to bring on some really fascinating guests. When this comes out, we'll probably already either be in or finished with our plant dieta in Portugal. So if you're interested in working with myself or my colleague Marav Artsy, that one will probably be finished. But we also have a retreat coming up in Canada, in Ontario. I believe it's either sold out or there's only one spot left, but when this comes out, if there's still a spot left, you can take a look at that. And then potentially at the end of the year, we'll be back in the Sacred Valley of Peru. But you can always find out more information on my website, which is nicotianarustica.com. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and Marav's site, which is tobaccodiets.com. So that's it. Again, I hope you enjoyed this. If you're able to support the podcast, that's always a really big help. Patreon is a really good option. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Also, those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. I really like the idea of sites like that too, because it's really based on this idea of reciprocity. So if you feel like you're gaining something from these episodes, it's a way to really give back. If you're not able to do that, just doing some of the really small things to help with the algorithms is really helpful. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review is really helpful. So I hope this finds you all well. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you all on the next episode.